Hello.
Hello, you're still appearing in magazines.
Yeah.
Gabriela picked up a magazine in Costco, and she
Oh,
opened and you were
oh yeah. I got a few calls from people.
there.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Hi, Walter.
Who?
How are you?
Beautiful day today.
Gorgeous day. Okay. I guess we'll have to wait.
Yeah.
Maria, switch off. I'll tell you to switch on again.
What?
Switch off. I'll tell you to switch on.
On three, no?
Yes.
We finished with Rava shooting an arrow, and in flight, the arrow shechted a bird. So the Gemara asks, well, how would we know that there was no chalada, burrowing? So the Gemara says, gid feed the mefarmi. The feathers in front of the throat of the bird were completely cut, so it didn't burrow, it cut from the way it normally cuts, from the front to the back. But there's another question. When you shecht a bird or a chaya, there's a mitzvah of kisu yadam. You have to cover the blood. So the Gemara says, Vaboy kisui. I mean, if they shechted this bird in flight, the blood probably went all over the place. So v'chitema the machasule, fine. They found all the blood and they covered it. Kisui adam has to be like a sandwich. You have to have dirt on the bottom, then the blood, then you put dirt on top, make a sandwich. Shenemar, v'chisau be'afar. Afar lo nemer, be'afar has to be within dirt. Melamed shashoichet tzarch shitin afar lamata v'afar lamala. And that's and for the Gemara, the zin and leila offered the kula piska. The whole area where the bird was flying, they had put dirt there. And then when they found the blood, they covered it and they fulfilled the mitzvah of kisuyada. Okay. We said with one, normally shchita is with, a sawing motion. But if he did it with one stroke, we said it's kosher. It has to be, but the knife has to be the width of the neck. It has to be more, the width of the neck and more. The question is how much more? Meaning the extra beyond the neck has to be another neck, like the width of the neck times 2. No. You have to measure the size of the knife to be the width of the neck with a little bit. Torshma. The shochet cut 2 heads in one stroke. If the knife had one width neck, we say kosher. Now, my love, echad. So what do we mean one neck? No more than one width. You already told me that even for one animal, the width of a neck is not good enough. You need a little bit more. So how could you say you get away with 2 animals with just one, with a knife the size of the width of one neck? That means beyond the neck has to be a double neck. Means the size of the width, the length of the knife has to be double the width of the neck. It's a whole nother neck beyond the regular neck. That's though if you're doing just one cut, right? But we said if you're going to do a double motion to and fro, then even a small scalpel would work. However, on Rav Menashe be Ismail Shein Kornai. As long like I have scalpels where at the tip of it it's like curved, so you can't have that. You can't have like a curve, because of course that will tear. What about a needle? It's going to tear. What about a machta de ushkapimai? Some kind of tool that people who worked with leather, which also came to a point, which was sharp. Can you shecht with that? Armele tanina. Afila koshu, even if the blade is small. Now, what are we talking about? My love machta dushkapi. We're talking about one of these leather tools. Versus lo ismil. Means a scalpel. There's a Beferish Mishnah that says Ismail. So this other din, Afila Kolshu, must be relating to that leather tool. The Gemara says no. Pirushi Kamafarish. My Kolshu, what do we mean Kolshu? Ismail. These are the Machta de Ushka. If you're going to tell me it's this leather tool, Hashta Machta de Ushka Pisharya, if you're going to allow, which is a longer knife, Ismail, we don't shy about an Ismail. So the Gemara says Ismail Itztrachalei. The Chiddush is about an Ismail. The fact that you can use a regular scalpel is a Chiddush, because maybe we would make a gzeira, since there are scalpels with horns or curvatures, we should prohibit even a straight scalpel because of those. So we say that we don't. Kamash Malam, we don't. Naflo sakin v'shachta. A knife fell off of a cupboard, and on the way from the cupboard to the ground, it shechted an animal. Aval b'shachta kedarka, we check, it's a good shechita, psula. You need kavana. Because it says, v'zovachta v'achalta. Masha tozavecha ta'ochel. It can't be a shechita without a person. Person has to be involved in the shechita. There was no human action, so a robot wouldn't be able to shecht. It's got to be human. It's got to be at least with human force. Time at the nafla. The reason why we puzzle because it fell. What if though the human threw it? Hahipula hu kshera. And let's say your intent was not to shecht, was just to throw it into the ground. Afagav lo mechavi. The Gemara is saying that the shechita is kosher even without kavanah. Man tanad lo binin kavanah l'shechita. There is a machlokes tanoim. Who's the tana that holds you don't need kavanah? On a Rav Nasani, the Tani Osher Zeir Dimin Chavrei, Zark Sakin Lenotza Bakoisel. He threw a knife against the wall. V'halcha v'shachta kedarka, and in flight, it shechted an animal. Rab Nasan Machshir, because you don't need kavanah. Chachamim Poislim, you need kavanah. Hu Tani Law, right? Oshai had learned this price. V'u Amar La'alach Rab Nasan. He stated he felt that Allah was like Rav Nasan, that you don't need kavanah. Freit the Gemara. V'amr Rava Chadizimna. Rava now told us that this Mishnah is Rav Nasan. What do I have to tell him? He's already told us somewhere else. It's not. Kulan sheshachtu. In the first parak that we learned, we said that a cotton, a cheresh, they can't shecht. But if somebody's watching them, kulan sheshachtu v'achem roinoy son, it's a shritos and kshera. V'amrina. Now these people cannot have kavanah; they have no das. Mantan lo boy kavanah l'shchita on Rav Nosani. So why do I have to repeat this here? Oh, the Gemara says we need it. Tzricha. The Ashmin and Hasam. The Mishnah of Hakol Shoichtin. Maybe I need it there. The Ashmin and Hasam. Shum kamacham l'shum chaticha ba'olam. Maybe over there Rav Nosson says it's okay because the cotton or the cheresh, they know they're cutting something. They might not understand the whole thing. But here, a guy is throwing a knife against the wall. There's no thought of cutting. At all. I would have thought, maybe Rav Nosson wouldn't say the shechita is good. So I had to be told, no. Even in this case, Rav Nosson would say the shechita is good. If the halacha here, we would have been told about Rav Nosson. Mishum de ka'as mikoach ben das. Well, it's being thrown without kavana, but at least a ben das it's his power. Aval hasam de ka'as mikoach ben das. The knife is moving without the koach of a ben das. Maybe aim alone without kavana. Tzricha. So we have to be told in both cases. Rav Nosson says the shechita is okay, doesn't need kavanah. Itmar. Nida shenensa v'tavla. You have a nida, and she fell into a mikveh. Right? It wasn't a mikveh. She fell into a river. The river has the quality of a mikveh. And she didn't jump in l'shem tahara. There was no kavanah of to be toivel. Arin Amarav, Tahara lebeis of asur lechol b'truma. She can live with her husband, but she can't eat truma if she's tummy or meiser sheni. Rav Yechon af lebeis lo tahara. Rav Yechon says no, she's not tahara either way. Ormle Rav Rav Nachman. The Rav Domer Torah LeBeis Vasher Lechol B'Truma. Rav distinguished and said that she's taught to live with her husband, but not to eat truma. Why? Ovan kores hutra. A husband sleeping with his wife who's a nida violates a negative prohibition that gives you kores. Isser mitzvah a boy. Somebody who is tummy and eats truma, it's only mitzvah b'dei shamayim. Kores is worse. It should be kavah chomer. If you're tahor for the nida, you certainly should be tahor for the truma. Amr lei bala chulinu. Living with your husband is not something to do with hegdish. It's a chulin issue. Chulin lo boy kavona. To undergo tahara with a mikvah, that it doesn't require kavana. For kotshim, like truma, meiser sheni, etc., that's going to require kavana. But not tamer. Now, where did you get this concept that for chulin you don't need kavana, and for hekdesh you need kavana? Gal shenitlash ubo arboim sa. You have a wave, and the wave separated from the rest of the ocean, and there were 40 saw in the wave. It fell on the ground at the beach. And a person was sitting there, and the wave fell, v'nafal ala adam ala kelim. And the person was tamei, the kelim were tamei. The din is tahirin. It's as if they went into a mikvah. And my love, Adam dumi the kelim. Ma kelim d'lo mechavni. The kelim obviously had no intent that they should go into a mikvah. They don't have das. Of Adam nami lo boy kavana. So too, the person doesn't require kavana. Now, this lechura has nothing to do with kotshim. So here's where we get this concept that if you have a mikvah without kavana for chulin, it works. So the Gemara says, "Mimai." Maybe he had kavana. Dilma b'yoshev mitzap askina nemasayit lashagal. Maybe he was sitting there and saying, "Oh, I'm waiting until a wave separates and it's going to crash on me because I want to become tahor." So maybe he had kavana. And the opposite, kelim dumid adam. Ma adam devinin kavana, just like a person requires kavana, af kelim nami dekom chavin lehu adam. The person has to have kavana for the kelim to become tor. Otherwise, they don't become tor. So that we could ask, well, what would be the chiddush if it's a case where he's waiting for the wave to detach? I mean, it's like any other purification. No. If you all of a sudden have rain that's pouring down a mountain, it doesn't connect. Let's say there are pools of water at the bottom and the beginning. It doesn't create a connection. So I might think, maybe I make a gzeira by the wave. We know that the chardalish kshamim is invalid. If I say that the wave is okay, I'll think that the chardalish kshamim would be valid. Or inami ligzer roshana to keep him. There are two parts of the wave. There's the head of the wave that crashes, and then there's the arc of the wave. Right? When people in the pipeline, right? The wave, and they're in the curl, right? And maybe people will think if they're in the curl, it works, but it doesn't work. So maybe we should go over the head or to the keepin. Kamashma the lo gazrina. How do you know? How do we know you can't have a valid tvila in the curl of the wave. It's not. Madbilim b'roishin, vein madbilim b'kippin. It has to be a detached wave, and that the head of the wave crashes on somebody you can't be in the curl. She'ein madbilin ba'avir, because that you're just sort of in an airspace between the wave and the water. That is not enough for tefillah. So where is the source that we don't need kavanah for chulin? It's not. You have fruit that fell into a river. And somebody whose hands are tamei put his hands in the water and took the peiros. Now his kavanah is to wash his hands. His kavanah was to grab the fruit. But since the Amas Hamayim, that's like doing the Natilas Yadayim. You just need quarter of a log of water for Natilas Yadayim. So if you put your hands in running water, it also works. His kavanah was to get the fruit. But yet, his hands become tor. That's number one. Upeiros einan b'chiyuta. Now, in order for food to become tamei, you need it to become moist with liquid. And you have to be happy that the liquid is on the fruit or the seeds. So these fruit that fell into this running river, he's not happy about that. And therefore, if something tummy touched it, it would not become tummy. However, if he wanted to wash his hands, yodav tohoros, and uperes b'chiyuta, he's happy that the fruit was in the water because he was able to get tefillah by doing that. So it seems to be that for chulin you don't need kavanah for tefillah. Eisvei Rav Nachman, tova lechulin v'uzik lechulin. You went into a mikveh and you're going to eat chulin food. Osir l'maiser. You cannot eat maiser because you didn't have kavanah for the maiser. Now, hulzik in. He has a chazaka because he had kavanah for chulin. Lo hulzik lo. But if he didn't intend to have kavanah for chulin, he's not. That seems to suggest that you need kavanah even for chulin. Even though he had kavanah to go into the mikveh to eat chulin, asr l'maiser. It's to teach you that din, nothing to do with that you don't need kavanah for chulin. Esvei. Tova v'lo. He went into the mikveh and he had no kavanah. So it says kilu lo tova. Now here there's a kasha, right? My love kilu lo tova klal. So it looks like you need kavanah. What is this lo kilu lo tova l'maiser? He didn't have kavanah l'maiser, so it's as if he didn't have tefillah for maiser. Aval tova l'chulin, even without kavanah. Who savardichu kumadchile? Rabba thought that Rav Nachman was sort of being matche and pushing him away. And he wasn't really sure that Mishnah Chagiga could prove that you didn't need kavanah for chulin. And therefore, Nafak Dak Ba'ashkach, Rabbi himself went out and investigated. And he found the Tanya. Tova v'lo hulzik. If you had no kavana when you entered the mikveh, mutter l'cholin v'osur l'maiser. So you see clearly that everybody holds, including Rav Nachman, and now Rava, that being toivel without kavana is okay for chulin. Amle by the Rav Yosef, leimet hevet to Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan said that if you don't have kavana for chulin, it doesn't work. So all these proofs that we've brought should be a kasha, Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan Rav Yonasan ben Yosef. There's another Tana that Rav Yochanan relies on, the Tanya. Rav Yonasan ben Yosef Omer, it says v'chubash shenitz v'taher. This is by a metzora on a beged. First, you wash it when the Kohen identifies there's a tsaras there. And then he has to put it into Hezger for a week, like quarantine. So if there hasn't been any spread of the tsaras, the Kohen tells them, wash it again. Or wash the area where there was a tsaras there. And then he puts it into quarantine again for another 7 days, for a total of 14 days. Now they've only washed it once initially. If they don't see anything after the 14 days, they wash it a second time. And that's actually putting it in a mikveh, this second washing. It says, v'chubas. Ma tamad lamer sheinis, meichish tichboshes shnil tichboshes rishona. The second washing is compared to the first washing. Ma tichboshes rishona l'das. The person has to understand what's going on with the first washing. He has to agree to it. For example, if the second time it happens to fall into a mukvah, that will not work. There has to be kavana. The Kohen has to be aware of kan bin das Kohen. Talmud lomer v'tayer. Mikol makom. So it doesn't require Kohen. Even if the non-Kohen washed it a second time, it works. But you do need kavana. And Rav Yochanan follows this issue. And it's just for chulin. Right? We're not talking about hegdish here. It's a ras, and you want to use the beged for a chulin purpose. Masker Rav Zivi Barashi, Umiyam Rav Yochanan Hachi, did Rav Yochanan really say that you need kavana for chulin? Vam Rav Yochanan halacha k'stam mishnah. Rav Yochanan has told us that the halacha is like an anonymous mishnah, and we have an anonymous mishnah. Utnan nafla sakin v'shachta. A knife fell from a shelf, and as it was falling, it shechted an animal. Aval b'shachta kedarka psula. The shechita was done. It's still possible there was no kavana. The avina, but time the nafla, because it fell. Hahi pila. If with intent somebody threw the knife, we say kshera. Afal gavdalo machave. He didn't really have kavana for shechita. He had kavana, let's say, to cut something. That's two different things. Vermina manta lo boy kavana l'shechita. We asked who's the Tana that doesn't hold that you need kavana for shechita. Amarav Rav Nosnu. And it's also chulin. And Rav Yochanan has said that halacha follows the Stam Mishnah. So the Gemara is thinking that Rav Yochanan would hold even by Tvila for chulin, it should be no requirement for kavana. So the Gemara says no. B'shchita, I feel Rav Yonasan ben Yosef will say you don't need kavana by shchita. Midikali Rachman mesase b'kotchim posel. For example, if you have korbanos and you're just playing around, you have with a knife, and it shechts. So there, because it says lirtzonchem tizbachu, you have to be aware that you're shechting. You can't just be misasek by kotchim posel. must be since there's a pasuk there by Hekdesh, Michlal Chulin lo bein kavona, even according to Rav Yochanan, even according to Rav ben Yosef. Now the Rabbanan who hold that even Chulin, no, the Rabbanan who argue with Rav Nosson that says you need kavana for shkita, what do they do with this limud that there's a pasuk by Kotchin that say you need kavana, mashma by Chulin, you don't need it. Nihid lo bin kavana lezvicha, but lechaticha bina. The having kavana to shecht and knowing that shechita is required for you to be able to eat the animal, that's zvicha. Versus just the concept of you're going to know that the trach and esophagus are going to cut, but it's not necessarily you're just cutting tissue. You don't need kavana l'zvicha, but a cutting, any kind of cutting, that you need to have a kavana, and therefore, when you threw a knife against the wall and it cut, you had no kavana to cut, so that's why it doesn't work. However, Amar Rava, ba'azachinu Rav Nosson Rabbanan. Based on this, Rav Nosson is going to beat out the Chachamim. Miksi v'chatachta. It doesn't say you shall cut. It says v'zavachta ksiv. And yibayin kavana l'chaticha. If you need kavana for the act of cutting, afilu zvichanami lepoy, then you have to understand that you're going to be able to eat the animal with this cutting. And you can't split these two. Now, we talked about the woman who was tamei that fell into a mikvah. How did that happen? Hechi dami nida shenensa v'tavla. One of her friends pushed her in or dunked her. Or forced her into the mikveh. Well, kavona de chaverta kavona mayasehi. The friend knew what tefillah is all about. The friend's kavona should work. So why wouldn't Rav Yochanan say that the woman could live with her husband? Va'od b'trumanami achla. She should be able to eat truma. Disnan. Hachreshes v'ashoyte v'asuma. A deaf mute who's female, or meshigana, or blind female, or shenitra fadaita, she became crazy, who are nidot. Im yeshlan pikchos metaktanisa. If they have friends that have intelligence, they can help them go to the mikvah and checks them and tell them when to go. And misaknos is some oichlos betruma, and they can also eat truma, not just live with their husband. On Rapab Rav Nosson shenaflam and agesher. We're not talking about that there was a friend who knew what was going on. She was crossing a bridge and she fell in. There's no kavanah at all, says Rav Nosson, and doesn't require any kavanah. Rabbanan sheyarda laker, or she went into the water because it was really hot. She wanted to cool off. Where at least there she's going into willingly into water. Okay, we'll stop here. Ezra at 8 o'clock, 25 minutes.